The 4 conversations a man over 60 should never enter again. What if the secret to protecting your peace in later life isn't about finding the right people to talk to, but knowing which conversations to walk away from? At 67, I made a decision that transformed my daily experience. I stopped participating in conversations that drained my energy and added nothing of value to my life or anyone else's. It wasn't about becoming antisocial or refusing to engage with others. It was about recognizing that some types of dialogue are toxic to the soul, regardless of who initiates them or how socially acceptable they might seem. After 6 decades of living, you've earned something precious: the wisdom to know that your time and emotional energy are finite resources. Every conversation you enter either adds to your sense of well-being or subtracts from it. There's no neutral ground when it comes to how you spend your mental and emotional capital. The ancient Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." At 60 plus, one of the most powerful ways to exercise this control is by choosing which conversations deserve your participation and which ones deserve your polite but firm exit. Today, we're exploring 4 types of conversations that wise men over 60 should recognize and avoid. Not because you can't handle them, but because you're finally smart enough to know they're not worth handling. These aren't just unpleasant exchanges you should avoid. They're energy vampires disguised as normal social interaction. And they're particularly dangerous for men at your stage of life because you may have developed the patience to tolerate them and the wisdom to see all sides, qualities that make you a target for those who need an audience for their dysfunction. If you've ever walked away from certain people feeling inexplicably drained, or if you're ready to protect your peace with the same intentionality you once protected your career, hit that subscribe button, because what we're discussing today could literally add years to your life by reducing the stress you voluntarily absorb. Number 1. The judgment circle. When character assassination becomes entertainment. Picture this. You're at a coffee shop with acquaintances, and someone mentions a mutual friend's recent life choice, maybe a career change, a new relationship, or a decision about their living situation. What starts as innocent observation quickly transforms into a dissecting table, where everyone takes turns analyzing what's wrong with this person's judgment. You know this conversation intimately. It begins innocuously enough, but before you realize what's happening, the group is critiquing choices that aren't theirs to make, questioning motives they can't possibly understand, and generally picking apart someone's life decisions with the casual cruelty that comes from distance and assumed superiority. Everyone contributes their expert opinion on what this absent person should do differently, how they would handle things better, what obvious mistakes are being made. The energy in the room shifts as people become animated by the shared activity of intellectual superiority and moral judgment. Dr. Brené Brown's research on shame and vulnerability reveals something crucial. People who regularly engage in criticizing others are usually struggling with their own feelings of inadequacy. When you participate in these judgment circles, you're not just wasting your time. You're feeding a collective need to feel better about personal shortcomings by focusing on someone else's perceived failures. At 60 plus, you've lived long enough to know that every story has multiple sides, that circumstances you can't see often drive decisions that seem foolish from the outside, and that your own life choices probably look questionable to people who don't understand your full situation. The wise man recognizes these conversations and gracefully extracts himself. You might say something like, "I don't know their full situation," or simply redirect, Speaking of changes, how's your garden coming along this season? You refuse to feed the beast of collective judgment because you understand that today's target could easily be tomorrow's judge. More importantly, you've learned that spending mental energy dissecting other people's choices leaves less energy for examining and improving your own life. The hour spent criticizing someone else's relationship decisions is an hour not spent nurturing your own relationships. Have you noticed how exhausting it feels to be around people who constantly judge others? Sometimes the best way to protect our own peace is simply refusing to participate in these sessions. Share your experience in the comments. Number 2, the endless complaint department, where problems multiply instead of resolve. Now imagine a different scenario. Someone approaches you with a problem. Legitimate frustration about work, family, health, or life circumstances. But as you listen, you realize this isn't someone seeking solutions or even genuine emotional support. This is someone who has found in complaints a way to avoid taking responsibility for their life. This conversation never leads anywhere productive because the complainer doesn't want solutions. They want an audience for their victimhood. Every suggestion you offer is met with reasons why it won't work. Every attempt to reframe the situation positively is countered with additional evidence of how bad things are. Dr. Guy Winch, who studies the psychology of complaining, found that chronic complainers often use their grievances as a way to avoid taking action. As long as they're focused on how unfair, difficult, or impossible their situation is, they don't have to acknowledge their own role in creating or perpetuating their problems. What makes this particularly draining for men over 60 is that your life experience has given you perspective on most problems and practical wisdom about solutions. You can see clearly what needs to be done, but the complainer isn't interested in your insight, they're interested in your sympathy and attention. I learned to recognize this pattern when I noticed certain people only called when they had problems to discuss, never when they had good news to share or genuine interest in my well-being. The relationship had become a one-way therapy session where I provided emotional labor without reciprocation. The chronic complainer will drain your emotional resources while giving nothing positive in return. They'll leave you feeling frustrated, helpless, and oddly guilty for having a relatively peaceful life while theirs seems perpetually chaotic. The wise response isn't to become callous to genuine suffering or to avoid people going through difficult times. It's learning to distinguish between someone who's processing legitimate challenges and seeking support versus someone who uses complaints as a lifestyle and expects others to absorb their emotional dumping without offering anything positive in return. When you encounter the endless complaint department, you can acknowledge their situation with compassion while refusing to become their unpaid therapist. That sounds really challenging. Have you considered talking to a professional who might help you work through this?
Number 3. The Blame Game Championship, where accountability goes to die. Consider this familiar scene. You're in conversation with someone who's explaining why their life, their relationships, or their circumstances aren't what they want them to be. But as you listen, you notice a pattern. Nothing is ever their responsibility. Every problem has an external cause. Every failure has someone else's fingerprints on it. Every disappointment is the result of other people's actions or society's unfairness. This is the blame game conversation, where personal responsibility is the enemy and victimhood is the default position. The person may be highly intelligent, articulate, and even charming, but they've developed a sophisticated system for avoiding accountability for their own life outcomes. You'll recognize this conversation by its core feature. Every story has the same protagonist, them, and the same plot: how others have wronged, disappointed, or failed them. Their ex-spouse was impossible to live with. Their children are ungrateful. Their former employers didn't appreciate their talents. Their friends aren't supportive enough. Society has changed in ways that make their success difficult. Carl Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But the chronic blamer reverses this wisdom. Everything that's wrong with their life leads them to an understanding of how others have failed them." What makes this conversation particularly toxic for men over 60 is that your natural problem-solving instincts kick in. You want to help, so you start offering perspective, suggestions, or gentle challenges to their victim narrative. But the blamer doesn't want solutions. They want validation for their worldview that life happens to them, rather than being shaped by them. This conversation is energy draining because it's ultimately dishonest. At your age, you've lived long enough to know that while external circumstances certainly affect our lives, our responses to those circumstances largely determine our outcomes. You've seen people overcome tremendous obstacles and others be defeated by minor setbacks. The blamer wants you to agree that they're powerless, that their problems are insurmountable, that they bear no responsibility for their situation. But your life experience tells you otherwise, creating an internal conflict between wanting to be supportive and knowing you're enabling a destructive mindset. The wise man recognizes that he cannot save someone from their own refusal to take responsibility. You can offer perspective once, compassionately, but clearly. After that, continuing to engage only reinforces their belief that their problems are interesting enough to deserve ongoing attention without any effort towards solutions.
Learning to avoid these 4 types of conversations, judgment circles, endless complaint sessions, blame game championships, and unsolicited life coaching isn't about becoming antisocial or refusing to engage with others. It's about recognizing that your peace of mind is precious, your emotional energy is limited, and your remaining years are too valuable to waste on conversations that diminish rather than enhance your well-being. The beautiful results of establishing these boundaries is that you create space for conversations that actually matter, discussions that inspire, inform, connect, or simply bring joy. When you stop feeding your energy to toxic dialogue, you have more to offer relationships and conversations that deserve your investment. In your 60s, you've earned the right to be selective about how you spend your mental and emotional resources. The people who truly care about you will understand when you gracefully exit conversations that don't serve anyone, and those who don't understand aren't the people whose opinions should concern you anyway. Viktor Frankl wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Sometimes the most important change you can make is simply walking away from conversations that add nothing positive to your life or anyone else's. If this message resonated with you, if you're ready to protect your peace with the same intentionality you once protected your career, make sure you're subscribed for more wisdom about living authentically and purposefully at every age. Share this with any man who might benefit from understanding that saying no to toxic conversations is saying yes to a better quality of life. And remember, your peace of mind is not a resource that others are entitled to consume.